Welcome back to the Almost Unbelievable YouTube channel with me, your host, Ranty. Thank you very much for stopping by. Now, have you ever heard of being in the right place at the right time and that you're the right man for the job? Well, that's what happened back in 1976, and it's a story we're going to get into right now. The day would have started like any other for most of the passengers on the number 15 Yerevan trolley bus back in Armenia on the 16th of September 1976. They had probably done this journey dozens of times, and they would have got on the bus and they would have been staring out of the window on their way to their destination. This day, however, would be completely different, because by the time that the journey ended, over half of the people on board would sadly have lost their lives. The bus was making its way past Yerevan Lake when one of the passengers wanted to get off. Unfortunately, where they wanted to get off, there was no stop for, and the driver, being a conscientious driver, said, "I can't drop you off here, there is no stop. It's not permitted for me to stop here, so you're just going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait till I get to the next stop and I can drop you off there." The passenger wasn't having any of that, however, and caused up such a fuss and such a row that the driver actually lost control of the vehicle, plunged off the road and then down an embankment and into Yerevan Lake itself. Brothers Shavarsh and Karapetyan had been out running on that same morning, and they were 10 miles into a run that would have lasted, or should have lasted, 13 miles. They were with their coach at the time, and when they got to Yerevan Lake, they heard a commotion. They looked over, they saw the bus crashing down the embankment. They heard the noise of metal being torn apart and ripped, and as it glided out into the water, they could see that these people, they needed help. Unfortunately for them, the two brothers that had seen this were actually very, very competitive swimmers in the field of fin swimming. Now, if you don't know what fin swimming is, because I had to look that up too, imagine how a mermaid looks. Imagine a fin at the back, or a flipper, and they attach it to their legs, and they're able to glide through the water by making motions like so, and they're able to get around faster than your average swimmer. Now, of course, they didn't have their equipment on them at the time. However, Shavarsh was also a very good swimmer, so he decided that he was going to jump in to the lake and he was going to go and try and rescue these people. He stripped off down to his underwear and he swam out. And as he's getting nearer and nearer and nearer, he could notice that the bus itself was slowly starting to sink. Now, I've seen enough YouTube videos about this particular type of event where a car goes into a body of water and people really have a hard time exiting the vehicle. And this would be no different on this particular bus, because the windows at the top were very slim, nobody could get out of them, and the front of the bus, clearly the electronics had been fried and nobody could get out of the bus there. So essentially they were trapped in what you could only call a kill box as it's slowly sinking. And they're there and they're seeing the water slowly seeping in from the bottom, and they're sinking. They're looking out of the window, they can see that the water's all murky and it's getting higher and higher and up the window. The terror that those people must have gone through must have been palpable. And of course, I wouldn't know myself how I would handle the situation of being in such an environment like that. I imagine that some of the people on the bus, they probably couldn't swim. There were probably old and infirm people on the bus too, and for all manner of reasons why people wouldn't want to get out of the bus even if they could. So the terror that they had been on this journey, they thought they were just going to go to a destination. Now they're really in a fight for their lives. And so as Shavarsh is swimming closer and closer and closer, he can see that the bus is sinking, it's getting lower and lower and lower, and he's racing to get there before the bus is completely submerged. And just as he gets there, the roof of the bus is just at the level of the water, and he grabs on to the top of the bus. And the only thing he can think of how he can try and free these people is to try and kick the window at the back. And he's using his feet to do that. He's holding on to the top of the bus, and he's kicking and kicking and kicking, and eventually, after many attempts, he finally breaks the window. Of course, that didn't stop him getting injuries to his legs. Of course, he's just kicked out this window, and there's shards of glass everywhere, and his legs were all cut up and torn up from the act of doing this. And add to that, you've now got all this water pouring in from the outside into the bus. The people inside, they have no way of escape, and they now have been met with this torrent of water coming in from the back of the bus. And I think their natural reaction would be to run away from that and get to the front of the bus, because they don't want to go in this water. Some of the people, of course, realise that this is their only means of escape, and around about 7 people actually do go out of the window and save themselves. But for the rest of the people, the other 85 people of the 92 that had not exited on their own, they were all in absolute peril. Now, Shavarsh's first instinct is to just dive down and go into the bus and grab the first person that he can find. And that's what he does. He goes down, he grabs the first person, and he drags them out of the window and swims up to the top of the water and then drags them to the shoreline. By this time, his brother and his coach are now at the shoreline, and they're ready to assist with this rescue. They grab this person and they pull them to the bank. But Shavarsh isn't finished yet. He's saved one person, but he still feels there are more people that he can rescue. So he goes back and he swims back out to the bus. He dives down, he goes through the window again, and he grabs another person and he drags them to the surface and swims them back to the shoreline. And this is repeated time and time again. However, there was still, at this point, having saved 2 and 7 saved themselves, there was still 83 people on board the bus. And now you've got to try and put yourself in the situation of the people that are still on board the bus. I mean, 1 minute they're going to a destination somewhere, and the next they're in the middle of a lake. And not just any old lake, this is a filthy ridden lake. It's freezing cold outside. They're surrounded by water. There's water pouring in through the back of the bus. There are people screaming in terror and fear. There are probably people injured from the original crash. There are people on board that probably can't swim. There are elderly. There are infirm people there too. And all these people are just being congregated and pushed back away from the water coming in. So everyone's getting incredibly crowded in there. It must have been absolutely terrifying. And the thought of actually leaving what would appear to be a safe space at this moment in time. I mean, you have oxygen and you're dry enough that you don't want to go in the water at the back of the bus, but you can breathe, you're still alive right now, and you know to escape you have to go out that window there. It would be terrifying for most people, and probably most people on board wouldn't have wanted to take that risk, even though it was their only means of escape. And Shavarsh now, he's coming back to this situation where you have all these terrified people on the bus, and he's diving down and he's grabbing people and he's rescuing some, and of course you would imagine too that he's going to meet resistance, and these people are going to say, I'm not going, no, don't save me, I'm going to stay here. You could imagine that is exactly what happened. Not everybody would have been putting their hand up to be rescued. So every time he dived down to grab someone, it probably took a few seconds for him to actually find someone willing to go with him and take that chance. But he went down over and over and over again. It was over 30 times that he went down, and he was able to save or bring to the surface 40 individuals. Now, of those 40 individuals, 20 would go on to survive. Unfortunately, the rest wouldn't make it. But the people on the bus, they were left to fend for themselves, because at this time Shavarsh was starting to have the early stages of hypothermia. You add that to the blood loss that he's had through kicking the window in, and he's getting more and more disorientated as time ticks on. But he still wants to go back. He goes back and he does it one last time. He goes down, he grabs somebody and he brings them to the surface, he swims them to the shore, only to find out that he didn't bring up a person, he actually just brought up a cushion. And that's how delirious he was at this time. And his brothers said, no more, you've done enough. Those people that are left on the bus, I'm sorry, but they have to be on their own now. You can't go anymore, you won't make it, you've lost so much blood, you're clearly disorientated, we have to say enough's enough. So at that moment in time, there was no more rescues. The people that were in the bus, they were left to their ends, and the people that he had saved were just waiting for the emergency services. Now Shavarsh would be ultimately taken to hospital. He would spend 45 days in hospital. He was in a critical condition when he got there. He'd lost a tremendous amount of blood, and he also had blood poisoning and pneumonia. This would, of course, go on to affect his swimming career. And he wasn't your average, everyday fin swimmer. He was at the pinnacle of his career. He had broken many world records. In fact, at that time, he had broken 10 world records. He also won 7 Soviet championships. He won 13 European championships, and he had won 17 world championships. The guy was incredible in his sport. But of course, the damage done to him and the effects of the pneumonia would leave a lasting effect. He would go on to race one more time. He would also break the world record another time, but the damage had been too severe from his injuries at this rescue that he was unable to compete ever again. 9 years after the rescue at the lake, he was also involved in another act of heroism. This time he'd seen a sports complex on fire and people trapped inside. He went over and he assisted the emergency services there. He went into the building and he rescued people from the inferno that was inside. He of course didn't escape uninjured. He was severely burned, and for his heroics there, he actually spent a further 2 weeks in hospital. Now it wouldn't be for another 6 years after the events at the lake until his heroics would be told to the world. The Soviets at the time, they wanted to keep this air of invincibility around them, and the idea that a bus had gone off and people had died in this lake, well, they didn't want that as any kind of news report, so they pushed it up and they kept it secret. But that wouldn't stop him finally being awarded the Order of the Badge of Honor, and his achievements were recognised. He also took part in the 2014 Winter Olympics, where he was part of the torch relay team, you know, at the start of the Olympics where they run with the torch. And of course, no good act of heroism is complete without having your name attached to an asteroid, because that's exactly what happened, as he had an asteroid named after him. So if you like this story and mysteries and true crime and things like that are of interest to you, please leave a like. Also, your subscription would be appreciated, and underneath me right now there are of course some other videos for you to watch so you get an idea of the channel. I'll see you all in the next one, guys. Take care.